Abigail Harris stepped off the transport ship and onto the polished, steel-tinted floor of the Galactic Empire's capital. The air was thick with the stench of artificial climate control, the hum of the city's hyper-advanced infrastructure vibrating beneath her feet. Above her, the towers seemed to touch the very heavens, their sharp, angular silhouettes casting long shadows across the vast plaza. The grandeur was suffocating. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the silent judgment of an empire that had conquered galaxies, now looking at her with quiet disdain. Her boots clicked sharply with each step as she walked across the immaculate surface, the wind stirring her dark hair. Her expression remained unreadable, an impenetrable mask honed over years of military strategy and high-stakes diplomacy. She had faced worse than this: the remnants of war-torn worlds, the aftermath of human loss, the whispers of betrayal. But here, in this place, all of it seemed distant. There was no war in the air here, only arrogance. Abigail glanced at the sleek, armored guards stationed at every corner of the plaza. They stood stiffly, their eyes unwavering as they watched her, their weapons carefully hidden beneath their cloaks. They were not just soldiers, they were symbols of the Empire's might. She didn't flinch. A slight shimmer of light in the distance signaled her arrival at the Grand Hall. She could almost feel the cold, artificial sense of superiority radiating from it, a stark contrast to the warmth of the earth she called home. She had heard tales of this place, of the magnificent, towering chambers where decisions of life and death were made by those who ruled the stars. Now she was here. The doors opened before her with a silent hiss, and she was ushered inside. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than outside. The walls were adorned with vast, holographic images of the Empire's victories, their triumphs over countless civilizations. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the smooth marble, as she was led to the center of the room, where a grand circular table awaited. Seated around it were the highest-ranking officials of the Galactic Empire, their faces carved with arrogance, their postures stiff with superiority. At the head of the table sat Archon Velzarek, the supreme leader of the Empire. His face was a mask of cold contempt, his dark eyes narrowed as he studied her every movement. Abigail stood tall, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture perfect. She knew what they were expecting, weakness, perhaps. A show of fear. She gave them none of that. Instead, she met Velzarek's gaze, her expression unwavering. Velzarek was a towering figure, even sitting. His violet skin, shimmering with faint lines of power, seemed almost unnatural in its smoothness. His eyes, pale white and glowing faintly, were locked onto hers as if he could see through her very soul. He was old, far older than most beings Abigail had encountered. His age was marked not just by his appearance, but by the air of authority he exuded. His voice was deep, almost guttural, as it boomed across the hall. "So, the human diplomat arrives," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "I must admit, I was expecting more of a spectacle." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Tell me, Abigail Harris, what brings a mere human to our presence? Surely you did not come all this way simply to beg for mercy?" Abigail's eyes never left his. She allowed a moment of silence to pass before responding, letting her words settle like a weight in the air. "I'm here for peace," she said, her voice steady. "But make no mistake. If you think for a second that humanity will bend to your will, you're gravely mistaken." Velzarek's lips curled into a slight smile, the arrogance almost palpable in the room. "Peace? You humans think you're entitled to peace simply because you've crawled your way into space? How quaint." He gestured toward the Empire's representatives. "Do you see these faces? They have conquered civilizations that dwarfed your tiny species in both power and scope. You, Abigail Harris, are nothing more than an insect in the shadow of the Empire's greatness." Abigail didn't react to his insults, her eyes flicking briefly to the other council members. They were silent, watching her with varying degrees of amusement. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening just slightly as she steadied herself. "Your empire is built on the bones of civilizations you crushed. But humanity doesn't work like that. We don't submit. We fight for what's ours. The room grew still, the tension thickening. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence hung, heavy with the gravity of her words. Velzarek studied her, his pale eyes flickering with interest. His smile faded, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of something else in his gaze. Curiosity. So you claim, he said, the words sharp. But I wonder, Abigail Harris, how long your spirit will last when the full force of the Empire bears down on you. She didn't hesitate. You attacked our home? And now, you will face the consequences. Velzarek's eyes narrowed, and the room tensed. The quiet mockery was gone, replaced by something darker. Is that a threat? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. No, she replied, her tone unyielding. It's a promise. There was no hesitation, no second guess. Abigail had delivered her challenge, and the implications of her words hung heavy in the air. She could feel it, the shift, the moment when the game changed. She had laid the foundation for what was to come. Velzarek's gaze flickered with something akin to amusement, though it quickly morphed into cold calculation. He leaned forward, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. I will entertain your proposition, human, he said, his voice low and almost amused. But understand this, you are out of your depth here. Abigail didn't flinch. Then I guess we'll see how deep the water runs. The room fell into silence again, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. The battle had begun, and though it was only in its infancy, both sides knew it would determine the future of the galaxy. And Abigail Harris? She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The negotiations had barely begun, and already the tension between Abigail Harris and the Galactic Empire felt like a live wire stretched taut across the table. The grand hall had grown colder, its towering walls reflecting the icy contempt the Empire had for her presence. The flickering light of holographic displays shifted, casting shadows across the room as Abigail kept her eyes fixed on the Imperial Council, each face as unmoving as marble. Across from her, Velzarek's eyes glowed faintly, a ghostly pale light in the dim atmosphere. He sat with a relaxed posture, but there was something in the way his fingers drummed lightly against the surface of the table that betrayed his growing impatience. He hadn't expected her to respond so firmly, nor had he anticipated the unshakable calm in her demeanor. Well, Abigail Harris, he began, his voice smooth and deliberate. You've made your claim. You say humanity will not bow. How quaint. But do you honestly think that your pitiful little species can stand against the might of the Galactic Empire? Abigail's fingers tightened just slightly around the edge of the table as she leaned forward. The eyes of the room were on her, some curious, some indifferent, but none supportive. The stakes were clear. She was alone, surrounded by those who held the galaxy in their grasp, yet she refused to flinch. If you truly believe that we are pitiful, then you have seriously miscalculated, she replied, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Humanity has fought and won against far greater odds than this. You will learn that the hard way. Velzarek's lips twitched, the barest sign of a smile. Is that so? He asked, his tone almost mocking. And how, exactly, do you intend to make me learn? Through diplomacy? Because I can assure you, that will get you nowhere. Abigail was ready for him. I don't expect diplomacy to work here. Not with you. I'm here to lay down a choice, peace or war. If you want war, then prepare to lose everything you've worked so hard to build. The words hung in the air, thick with threat. Velzarek's smile faltered, his posture slightly stiffening. He was used to commanding, to intimidating, but this human was not afraid. It unsettled him in a way that only the truly unpredictable could. Your arrogance is impressive for someone so out of their depth, Velzarek sneered. But I'll humor you. I'll give you your peace for now. However, you will return to your pitiful homeworld and tell your people that we don't need their weak alliances or their inferior technology. If you fail to convince them to submit, I'll ensure that the next generation of humans will grow up learning how to bow to their rightful rulers. Abigail's lips curled into a thin smile, though it was anything but friendly. You don't seem to understand, Archon. We're not afraid of you. Velzarik's expression darkened at the challenge, but before he could respond, one of his advisors, a sleek, reptilian figure with gleaming eyes, spoke up. Your Excellency, the advisor said, voice smooth as oil, may I suggest we proceed with our original plan? We've already mobilized the fleet, and our forces are ready to strike against the human colonies. The smaller factions of this peace process are nothing more than a distraction. Abigail's eyes flicked to the advisor. He was one of the Empire's strategists, and his suggestion was a clear signal. The Empire wasn't interested in peace, only domination. She had expected it, but hearing it spoken aloud still stung. She had no intention of showing weakness now. Is that what you think? She asked, her voice dropping low, the words cutting through the room. That humanity is just a distraction? That we're an inconvenience to you, and you'll squash us like an insect underfoot? Velzarik's eyes narrowed. You underestimate us, human. And you, Abigail said, her voice growing colder, are gravely underestimating us. The silence that followed stretched long, the tension thickening with every passing second. Then, with a calculated motion, Velzarik raised his hand. The room went quiet as the holograms flickered again, displaying images of the human colonies, vulnerable, unprotected, ripe for the taking. The Empire's fleet was already positioned. I've made my decision, Velzarik said, his voice a chilling calm. The Empire does not negotiate with ants. We crush them. Before Abigail could respond, the holographic display shifted, and a new image appeared, a schematic of human defenses on one of their colonies. Velzarik's fleet had already engaged a few skirmishes, but now it was time to push forward. His gaze flicked back to her. Do you see that? He asked, gesturing to the image. This is the consequence of your defiance. Humanity will crumble under the weight of our power. You are simply delaying the inevitable. Abigail kept her eyes on the display, refusing to show even a hint of worry. She had anticipated this move. In fact, it was exactly what she had hoped for. The Empire, confident in their strength, had just made the mistake of revealing their hand too early. You're too confident, she said, her voice calm but tinged with steel. You think we're unprepared, that we're weak. But you're wrong. Velzarik leaned forward, an expression of growing irritation crossing his face. What is it that you think you know, human? Do you have some secret weapon hidden away that will save you? Some miracle? Abigail smiled, just a little. I do. And it's not a weapon. Velzarik's eyes narrowed. What is it, then? It's called resolve, she said quietly. You may think that humanity's colonies are isolated and vulnerable, but they're not. We fight for more than survival. We fight for something greater. Your fleet can attack all you want. But when the humans unite, when they realize that the Empire is coming for them, they'll strike back harder than you can imagine. For a moment, Velzarik was silent, the weight of her words pressing in. He had seen this defiance before, from lesser species, empty threats, hollow posturing. But something about her conviction unsettled him. Something in the way she stood, unyielding and sure of herself, made him second-guess his own certainty. Your resolve will not save you, he said slowly, his voice a quiet menace. The Empire's might is absolute. Abigail's gaze locked with his, unflinching. Then we'll see, won't we? She stood, her posture straight, her gaze still steady as she turned to leave the room. The Imperial officials were silent, watching her every movement. There was no applause, no cheers, just the hum of oppressive silence. As the door closed behind her, Abigail's thoughts were already shifting, calculating her next move. Velzarik had just made his first mistake. He had underestimated her. And humanity? Humanity was about to show him just how wrong he was. Ask ChatGPT. Abigail stood in the shadows of the Galactic Empire's grandest corridors, her mind racing as she watched the towering statues of past conquerors lining the walls. The capital was a place of unimaginable wealth and power, but to her, it felt like a gilded cage. She wasn't there to admire the Empire's monuments. She was there to find a way to win. Her meeting with Velzarik had been a test, a power play that she knew would end in failure if she remained on the defensive. The Empire's arrogance was palpable, but beneath that arrogance was a dangerous, calculating mind that had led the Empire to its peak. She needed to outthink him, outmaneuver him. A show of force wouldn't work. The Empire was too entrenched in its own superiority. She had to find a weakness. The hallway stretched before her, empty and silent, but behind every closed door, every whispering servant, there were secrets she needed to uncover. She had no illusions about the path ahead. The Empire didn't just offer power, it demanded loyalty, and any resistance was met with brutal efficiency. But Abigail wasn't interested in loyalty. She was interested in leverage. Her steps echoed as she made her way to a discreet side entrance, one that led to a section of the capital's underbelly, a place far from the watchful eyes of the imperial elite. This was where deals were struck, where the Empire's darker dealings took place. Here, in the shadows, she hoped to find the cracks in their empire. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a group of figures sat around a table, their eyes sharp, their movements precise. They weren't Imperial soldiers, but they carried the air of those who had learned to survive in the Empire's shadow. Abigail's arrival was met with cautious silence. "Abigail Harris," one of the figures spoke, his voice low but firm. "We've been expecting you. I need your help," she said without preamble, her voice steady, even though the weight of her request felt heavier than the room's atmosphere. "The Empire is going to war with humanity. I need to know everything about their fleet, their strategy, their vulnerabilities. If I'm to stop this, I need to understand how they think." The figure, a wiry man with dark eyes and sharp features, nodded slowly. "You're asking for a lot, Diplomat. The Empire doesn't give up secrets easily. I'm not asking for free. You'll get your payment," Abigail replied, her voice colder now. "I'm offering something the Empire can't, real power." He tilted his head, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Power? What kind of power can a human diplomat offer that the Empire hasn't already taken?" "Leverage," Abigail said, her eyes flashing with intensity. "The Empire may control the stars, but there are those within its own ranks who are tired of their tyrants' rule. You can help me expose their corruption. Together, we can break the Empire's grip on the galaxy." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the man leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're dangerous, Abigail Harris. But you're right about one thing, the Empire's cracks run deep. If you're serious about bringing them down, we'll help. But know this, once we give you what you want, there's no turning back." Abigail's gaze didn't waver. "I've never turned back." With a single nod, the man signaled the others. They moved swiftly, gathering data from hidden terminals and encrypted files, the kind of intelligence the Empire thought it had buried beyond reach. Abigail stood still, watching them work, her mind already processing the next steps. The information they were about to provide would be her weapon in the coming conflict. As the data came through, a strange mixture of fear and excitement bubbled in her chest. The Empire's fleet was vast, vast enough to crush entire worlds in a matter of days. But the intelligence they'd gathered was invaluable. The Empire's primary battle fleets, it seemed, were vulnerable in ways they hadn't anticipated. There were gaps in their logistics, blind spots in their fleet movements, and, most importantly, dissent growing among certain factions of the Empire's military leaders. "Here," the man said, pushing a datapad toward Abigail. "This is what we've found. It's not everything, but it's enough to put a dent in their strategy." She took the datapad, her fingers brushing against the cold surface as the schematics of the Empire's fleet unfolded before her. There were weaknesses, communications blackouts, gaps in fleet coordination during their operations. It was a blueprint for how to turn the Empire's strength into their own downfall. She felt a surge of relief and resolve. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly, scanning the data. "If we can expose these vulnerabilities to the right people, it'll cause chaos. The Empire will be forced to pull back, rethink their strategy. If I can make enough noise, we can rally more factions against them. The man looked at her with a mixture of respect and skepticism. And you think the galaxy is ready to listen? The Empire has been around for millennia. They're not going to fall that easily. They don't need to fall all at once, Abigail replied, her voice hardening. We start small. We hit them where it hurts, disrupt their fleets, undermine their control, and make them question their own power. They've been underestimating humanity from the beginning. That's their mistake. The galaxy is tired of them. We just need to show them that. There was another pause as the man absorbed her words. Then he nodded. You're playing a dangerous game, Harris. But if it works, we'll be right behind you. Good, she said. Then let's make sure it works. With the plans in place, Abigail left the hidden room, her thoughts spinning. She knew the risks. Exposing the Empire's weaknesses wasn't just about strategy. It was about timing, about knowing exactly when to strike and how to apply pressure without revealing too much too soon. The information they just acquired was vital, but she needed more. She needed to find a way to broadcast this information to the right ears, to people who could use it to rally the galaxy. Back in her private quarters, Abigail sat at a secure terminal, tapping away at the controls as she prepared to send the intelligence to her contacts. She would need to act quickly. If the Empire even suspected she was behind the leak, the consequences would be swift and brutal. But there was no room for hesitation now. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. As the data transmission completed, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. The game had changed. The Empire no longer held the upper hand. It was time to make them pay for underestimating humanity. And this time, Abigail wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting to win. Ask ChatGPT. The Empire's capital felt colder now, more oppressive, as if the very air had thickened in response to the growing tension. Abigail Harris had spent weeks inside its walls, weaving her web of influence, gathering intelligence, and working her contacts in the shadows. Now, the time for subtlety had passed. The leaks she'd orchestrated had already begun to spread through the galaxy. Rumors of the Empire's vulnerabilities were trickling into the right hands. Discontent had begun to spread within the Empire's own ranks, and that, Abigail knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. Her meeting with Velzarek had made one thing clear: the Empire was not taking her seriously. They hadn't even considered the possibility that humanity would rise against them, that the tables might turn. But with every passing day, the Empire's arrogance had started to crack. The first signs were small, almost imperceptible: communication breakdowns within the fleet, a few failed strategic moves, but they were enough to unsettle the high command. Now, the game was shifting. The odds were no longer stacked in their favor. The Imperial briefing room was vast, a cold, sterile chamber bathed in harsh light, as if to emphasize the Empire's overwhelming power. Abigail was led inside by an aide, her every step echoing in the silence. As she entered, her eyes scanned the room quickly. High-ranking officers, members of the Imperial Council, and other dignitaries, all seated in tense silence. At the far end of the table, Velzarek awaited her, his face as cold and unreadable as always. "Abigail Harris," he said, his voice smooth but laced with an underlying irritation. "You've managed to stir up quite a disturbance in the galaxy. I trust you understand the consequences of your actions?" Abigail stood tall, her back straight, her eyes unwavering as she faced the room. The air between them felt thick with the weight of unspoken words. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but it didn't faze her. She'd faced worse in her career, and this was no different. "I understand," she said simply, her voice cutting through the tension. "But the Empire has made its intentions clear. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate humanity." Velzarek leaned forward slightly, his pale eyes narrowing. "You think you've done something significant? A few leaks, some rumors. You're still a minor nuisance, Abigail. You have no idea what you're up against." "You're wrong," she replied, her tone firm. "The Empire doesn't just face a nuisance. You face a reckoning." There was a long pause as Velzarek studied her. The arrogance in his eyes remained, but there was something else there now, an uncertainty that hadn't been present before. He'd always believed that humanity was nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience, something to be swept aside with a wave of his hand. Now, it was clear to him that Abigail was no ordinary diplomat. She had become a force of her own, and that was beginning to unsettle him. "Enough of this," he said finally, dismissing her words with a flick of his hand. "You've managed to disrupt a few of our operations. But it changes nothing. Our fleets are in place. Our forces are ready. The rest of the galaxy will fall in line, as always." Abigail could feel the challenge in his words, but she wasn't about to let him get away with that arrogance. "Not this time. There's a fissure in your empire, Archon. And it's spreading. You may think your fleet is invincible, but it's not. The cracks are already there. You just haven't noticed them yet." Velzarik's eyes flickered with something. Was it doubt? A flash of something far more dangerous? He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. "You think this fissure will save you? That your petty games of subversion will halt the tide of the Empire?" "No," Abigail said, her voice calm but edged with quiet conviction. "I don't need to save humanity from you. I just need to show the galaxy that the Empire is not invincible. And when they see that, they will turn. They will fight back." There was a sudden, sharp silence. The officers around the table exchanged glances, some wary, others intrigued. Velzarik's lips tightened into a thin line, the only indication that her words had found their mark. He had underestimated her from the beginning, but now the reality was setting in. Abigail wasn't just a diplomat, and humanity wasn't just a fledgling species. "Very well," Velzarik said, his voice colder than before. "You've made your point, Harris. But you forget one thing: the Empire does not lose. Not to humans, not to anyone." Abigail wasn't done yet. "Then why are your fleets experiencing logistical failures?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. "Why are your commanders starting to question your orders? Why are some of your own officers looking to defect?" Velzarik's face darkened, his eyes flashing with fury. "You speak of things you don't understand," he growled. "There is no dissent in the Empire. Only loyalty. That loyalty is crumbling," Abigail said, her tone unwavering. "And the cracks are spreading faster than you realize. Your Empire is not as unshakable as you think. You'll soon find that it's not just humanity you have to worry about." The room was heavy with silence as Velzarik glared at her. She could feel the intensity of the moment. This was the turning point, the moment when the Empire's foundation would either crumble or solidify. She wasn't backing down now. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Velzarik stood, his towering form casting a long shadow over the table. "You're playing a dangerous game, Abigail Harris," he said quietly. "But understand this: you're far more valuable to me alive than dead. But if you continue down this path, I won't hesitate to make you a warning to others." Abigail met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I'm not here to be a warning, Velzarik. I'm here to ensure humanity's place in this galaxy. If that means tearing down your empire, then so be it." Velzarik's face twisted into a cruel smile, but there was no warmth in it. "We'll see, human. We'll see just how far your resolve goes when you're up against the full force of the Empire." As he turned and walked away, the room seemed to shrink, the weight of his words pressing down on her. But Abigail wasn't deterred. The first cracks had appeared in the Empire's facade. Now it was time to strike. She had taken the first step, but the true battle was just beginning. The war for humanity's future was about to unfold, and she was ready to fight. There was no turning back now. The silence in the Imperial Council chamber was deafening as Abigail stood before the grand table, the cold glare of Velzarik's eyes fixed on her. He had not expected it to come to this. They had underestimated her, her resolve, her ability to strike at the heart of the Empire's carefully constructed facade. The whispers of dissent she had seeded, the chaos she had unleashed, had all but eroded the once indomitable confidence of the Empire. But now, the battle had entered its final phase. Abigail knew this would be the moment that decided everything. The Empire had gathered its forces, and Velzarek had prepared his final countermeasure. But what he had failed to realize was that he had already lost control. The cracks were now visible to all. The Empire's vast, suffocating power had fractured under its own arrogance. The galaxy had started to turn, and humanity had only just begun to prove its worth. Abigail Harris. Velzarek's voice rang out, low and commanding, though there was an unmistakable edge to it now. You have stirred a storm you cannot control. You believe you've exposed our weaknesses, but in doing so, you have brought doom upon your own people. She didn't flinch. You don't scare me anymore, Velzarek. You had your chance for peace. Now it's over. The Empire's once grandiose sense of invulnerability had been replaced with a barely contained rage, but Abigail was resolute. She had outplayed him every step of the way, and now, the galaxy was watching. The final transmission had gone out, leaked footage of the Empire's corrupt dealings, its failed military operations, and the dissent within its ranks was now public knowledge. The galaxy could no longer pretend that the Empire was a stable force. The tipping point had come. Velzarek's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into a mocking smile, though there was nothing jovial about it. You think this is your victory? Your petty campaign of leaks and sabotage will amount to nothing. Humanity is insignificant, and you are just a fleeting moment in the history of the Empire. Abigail's eyes burned with defiance. You still don't get it, do you? Humanity is no longer your puppet, Archon. You don't control us, and you never will again. Her voice was steady, but the tension in the room was palpable. She had given the Empire a chance to retreat, to reconsider its course, but they had refused. Now, it was time for the final confrontation. Velzarek stood slowly, his towering form imposing even in the face of her defiance. He was a creature of absolute control, and for the first time, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes betrayed the realization that he had miscalculated. You've made this personal, human. Very well. We'll see who's the last one standing. The chamber was now buzzing with the undercurrent of a final, irrevocable war. The atmosphere was thick with the finality of their words, the moment of no return. Velzarek's arm raised in a sharp motion, and immediately, the holographic display behind him shifted, showing the strategic positions of his remaining fleet. A final push. A final chance to subjugate humanity. I've already ordered the fleet to advance, Velzarek said, his voice dripping with venom. You will regret crossing me. Abigail didn't flinch. Instead, she took a steady breath, her mind already calculating the next move. This was not just about resistance anymore. It was about exposing the heart of the Empire's false supremacy. The galaxy had seen its cracks. Now, they would see its fall. Your fleet is already on the move, she replied coolly. But it won't make it far. Velzarek's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, a signal blinked on the console at Abigail's side. She glanced down at the incoming message, her expression shifting for only a moment. It was time. You may think your fleet is invincible, Velzarek, Abigail said, turning her gaze back to him. But you miss something important. Your perfect command structure. The one that allowed you to subjugate billions. It's unraveling. Her words cut through the room like a blade. There was no hesitation now, no room for doubt. Velzarek's eyes flickered to the display again, his gaze hardening. What are you saying? He demanded, his tone edged with disbelief. Abigail smirked, stepping forward as the final message was transmitted. I've already sent the signal, Archon. The galaxy is watching. Your fleet is already compromised. Your loyal commanders? Not so loyal anymore. The room fell deathly quiet. Velzarek's expression twisted into one of disbelief. The room's atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to chilling dread. His worst fears were confirmed. Abigail had already acted. The cracks she had helped foster within the Empire's ranks had deepened. And the fleets that had once been a symbol of invincibility were now divided. His final push was doomed. Impossible! Velzarek hissed, turning toward his officers, barking orders with increasing desperation. Call the fleet back. Re-establish command. Now! But it was too late. His officers, already disillusioned, now saw no reason to obey. Reports of insurrection, of commanders unwilling to follow orders, flooded the room. The Empire's shipyards, once the pride of the galaxy, now housed dissidents. The very forces Velzarek had relied upon were turning against him, unwilling to continue their path of destruction. Abigail's voice, quiet yet filled with unwavering conviction, rang out. "It's over, Velzarek. You've lost." The Archon's eyes narrowed, his fury boiling over, but even in his rage he knew the truth. The moment of his empire's collapse had arrived. There was no victory to claim here, no way to salvage his crumbling dominion. He turned, fists clenched in frustration. "This isn't the end," he muttered, his voice seething with venom. "The Empire is eternal." Abigail's eyes softened for just a moment, but her words remained as resolute as ever. "Not anymore. Humanity's future isn't tied to your tyranny. It's tied to our strength, our will, and our resolve." Velzarek hesitated, his gaze shifting from Abigail to the chaos unfolding within his own ranks. It was clear now, there was no path forward. His empire was breaking apart, and all the power he had accumulated was slipping through his fingers. With a final, bitter glance toward Abigail, he turned away, his voice quiet but filled with an air of finality. "This isn't the last you've seen of the Empire." Abigail stood tall as the room descended into chaos, her every breath a testament to the victory humanity had earned. The galaxy had been watching, and they had seen the Empire's fragile empire crumble under the weight of its own hubris. She wasn't just a diplomat anymore. She was a symbol of humanity's defiance, of its ability to stand against the impossible and rise. The Empire was no more. And humanity had won.